Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone if you'd like to ask a question. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I'd like to ring over to Ms. Wendy Peebles. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you, operator. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Peebles, Lead Outreach Coordinator, Census Bureau, Governments and Trade Management Division. With me today is Karen Wrege with the State Department, Directorate Defense Trade Controls, Chief Information Officer, who will be discussing their IT modernization projects. The Census team is happy to collaborate with the State Department to provide you this IT modernization update. First, I'd like to start by thanking everyone for joining today's webinar. We have an informative webinar planned, and I would like to go over a few items before we start. The webinar is being recorded, and for confidentiality reasons, we ask that during the question and answer period that you only provide your first name and do not disclose your company's name or any other sensitive information. The question and answer period will occur at the end. A few days following the webinar, the transcript, recording, and presentation will be posted to the Census website. Lastly, we value your feedback, so please complete the evaluation form at the end as it assists us in planning future webinars. Now we're ready to begin with the subject matter for today. Karen, you may begin.
Thank you, Wendy. It's really good to be here, and I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar on the DDTC IT modernization effort. We hope that you find this information useful. Before we begin, I'll take a moment to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my experience. I have 30 years of experience in information technology in the private and public sectors. I joined DDTC in December 2014. DDTC's mission is to ensure commercial exports of defense articles and defense services are consistent with U.S. national security and foreign policy objectives. So I was brought in to DDTC for the sole intent and purpose of modernizing the IT systems. And it's been quite a ride. It's taken me a lot longer than I thought it would. And I think, at the end of this journey or when we deploy, and that won't be the end of the journey entirely, but I think it's going to make a big difference for everyone in industry and certainly for all of us inside the State Department DDTC. So for today's webinar, we are going to look at the DDTC's IT modernization as a program, how it began, its current state, where we hope to go. Then we're going to do a demo of the DDTC registration renewal process. And I decided specifically not to do a new application since most of our entities that need to register are really in the renewal process, which is an annual process where they have to update their information and pay for their annual registration fee. So we're going to go through that and what that looks like so you'll have an opportunity to see how the new application will work. We're then going to discuss the next steps, and then lastly, we're going to end with a Q&A session that hopefully will answer all your questions from the phone line and the live chat. All right, so when you look at this photo, what do you see? I see a change in how we handle information and ourselves going forward. The importance of consolidating and how less is more. So on the left side of the screen a depiction of sort of how we all do business with the DDTC, and the right side is how we hope to do business in the future. So we're using several different off-the-shelf tools for the DEX applications. We're not building something from scratch. So we're using ServiceNow as our case management platform, Okta as our authentication platform, Box as our document management platform, and finally Tableau as our data analytics and visualization platform. So we're using all of these cloud services, sort of depicted on the right, going to the cloud, to do a few things. What this is going to help us do is not have to maintain our network, hardware, and all of those things, and we can focus more on the business, making it easier for you to apply and get applications processed, and making it easier for us to do our mission, making sure that, that our mission to ensure commercial exports of defense articles and services is consistent with U.S. national security and our foreign policy objectives, which as citizens, we are really all concerned about. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish here, sort of in the grand scheme of things with this IT modernization. So we have made significant progress, and you'll notice this is not a sprint. This dude does not look like he's doing a sprint. It's an actual picture of someone doing a marathon. So what we've recently done is redesign the DDTC website. This is not something I had planned to do before doing the application revitalization, but the industry really provided a lot of feedback to us about how important it was to modernize our website. So we decided we did that first. We completed industry testing for advisory opinions very recently, and we're conducting industry testing currently for the registration application, and that's going to be closing next Monday. But we've gotten a lot of great feedback from all the testers that have been involved in both of those processes for advisory opinions and registration. All right. So what we're going to do now is the live demo of the registration renewal process. So if you'll just stand by for a second or two until we get that loaded up. This is the sign-in. There's an enrollment process for new entities, but anybody that is an existing entity with us are going to get instructions on how to access DEX. This is actually the industry portal page. What it does is it shows who you're logged in on the top right-hand corner. On the very right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a submit feedback. This is information that's really important to us. When you submit feedback, it automatically goes into a queue that someone is monitoring, and we use that industry feedback to allow us to make improvements in the system. In very short order, and we use this very successfully for our website update. We've got frequently asked questions down below the industry portal that you can make use of. You can ask questions. You can do searches, and then on the very top of the screen is where the drop-down is for the different applications. So we're going to go ahead and click on registration. Okay, and this application has two-factor authentication. So what we're going to do now, we've actually asked it to call the mobile phone, and once the mobile phone number, once that gets answered, there's like a 5-digit code that we're gonna get. So very slowly, the operator provides us with the number, and then we're going to click verify.
Hi, Karen. While we're loading, sorry to interrupt, but we are experiencing a little static on the line. If you maybe could just adjust slightly. I'm not sure if you're too close, but we are getting a few comments in from the participants that there's a little staticky on the line.
Okay. All right. So is that any better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Thanks so much for letting me know that.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we're on the registration screen, and on the top section is where information about your active registration will be located. So you can see the registration code. If there's multiple codes, you would have multiple registration codes that would show up there, when it was issued and when it expires. And of course, this is important because you need to renew your registration within 30 days of it expiring, and so you want to pay attention to that, and there'll be communication that can come out about your renewal and what those dates are. But it's also a really good way of doing this on your own, and that's really what how DEX differs a lot from our current legacy systems, is that you were previously needing to contact our help desk or our response team to get information about what to do next. And so all of that is self-service on DEX. So on the right-hand side, you'll see, or in the middle of the screen, you'll see sort of the little blocks where there's different things you can do viewing the registration. You can see comments about the registration, the actual registration letter, and you can also renew the active registration. So we'll go ahead and renew it. And so then you'll notice that the form itself, the 2032, has a number of different sections or blocks. The first section is asking the question, is the applicant a U.S. person? What type of registration action you want to do is block number 2. Is there any foreign ownership? What is the application's organizational type? What's the applicant's legal name and address? The directors, senior officers, partners, and owners. So during the registration process or the renewal process, you will update any of your directors, senior officers, partners, or owners. And then number 7, the block 7 is what U.S. munitions, what do you actually do business with? And so you'll have an opportunity to select or modify those. Block number 8 is the U.S. or foreign subsidiaries or affiliates. Block 9, the applicant parent entities. So again, we're looking for all the different companies that you do business with and updating those. So you should be, for any of you on the line that are DDTC users, this is not unfamiliar to you. And then block 10 is the ITAR compliance, questions, and finally 11 is, sort of the certifications and the signatures and that sort of thing. So we're going to go ahead and scroll down through the Privacy Act statement, and then we're going to click Start. All right, so you'll notice that on the previous screen, what we had done is we had already clicked Renew, and so you'll see there's 2 little check marks on Block 1 and Block 2. And what those check marks mean is that those 2 sections have been gone through by the user and are good to go. And that green check mark identifies that as good to go. So each and every time that you press Next, it actually is saving the information from that screen, so you don't have to press Save and then Next. It automatically does it. But if you're in the middle of a screen, you have the option of clicking on Save and the Save, and then you can stay on that screen and not go to the next screen. So all of these questions, you'll notice, have been filled out, and because this is a renewal, what we've done is we've migrated all of your existing data as best we could from an old application, and we're basically filling in what you had on your previous application, which will make this thing go very quickly. So basically we're going through and identifying what needs to change here. And so if in tab 5, we're on tab 5, if we wanted to update the company address because we've moved, we could update that address by just, doing the new address and then, clicking on Next at the bottom of the screen. Okay, and then Block 6 is the members of the board, and what happens here is that for each member of the board, you would want to go through and make sure that all that information is accurate and update any information that is not up to date, and then you would click Save. You could also remove a member of the board if that's something that needs to be done. So we're going to go ahead and try that. So we've deleted that board member, which is from tab 6. And suppose that there's another person that you wanted to add, you could go ahead and do that by just clicking on the plus sign to add a new board member. So why don't we move on? We'll move on to tab 7. So And in this section, like I said, the USML categories are outlined from your previous application. And suppose that you're now doing business with Category 2, in addition to Category 1, which is firearms, you can go ahead and click on Category 2 and then just update that further down on the page by clicking Next. All right, and so we can just continue moving on through the affiliate and the subsidiaries, parent entity information. Now you've got the ITAR written policies. Do you have a policy and procedure? We're going to blow through that. And now we have all of the certifications. So if you need to make any updates in the certifications, you would do that. Down here, you could add documents that are required under the filing. And it's a very standard way of adding files to your record by, clicking on it, and it'll open up those files. You'll identify what type of file it is. And then you're going to, so now you've got these two files and you've identified what they are, and now you can go ahead and select who the senior officer is from among the people who are on the application already, and you can submit it for signature. Okay, so we have this sort of extra step now. The application has been submitted, but it's waiting for signature. So this is the notion that this is a very long application, or it could be if there's a lot of subsidiaries, a lot of people involved. And so potentially some admin person would fill out all of that information, but what we actually need is the senior officer to sign and to make the signature, and that person can actually look at everything that has been put in to ensure for its completeness and accuracy and all of that before they go ahead and sign it, so they can have access to all of that. And then they would key in their signature, and then they would sign and make payment. Okay, so, and this is a big difference between our previous systems and new DECs, in that the way that we accomplished payments in the past was using wire transfers, and that was a really difficult process for DDTC, in that we had to marry up the wire transfers that came to our finance area with the applications that were submitted to DDTC. And so what we've done is we're actually using pay.gov, which is a treasury system that allows allows entities to make payments in a variety of different ways. If it's a small payment, one of the minimum registration fees, it might be a Visa or a PayPal or an Amazon Pay. If it's a very large payment, millions of dollars for a very, very large company, you would initiate an ACH payment, which is sort of the equivalent of a check. So we can go ahead and go through that process. In this case, we'll do the payment with the debit card. And so what we've done right now is we have moved out of DEC, away from the Department of State, and we're on this Treasury system. So Department of State, the Directorate does not hold any of this credit card information or any of that. Treasury is going to take care of all that back office support for us. And they do this for all the regulator, they do this for a lot of different customers within the federal space. And so we filled out all of the required fields, and we can go ahead and continue. Okay, and this payment amount was just the minimum payment for registration. So you can see the payment amount was $2,250. it was a visa, and so on and so forth. And so we're going to review, we're going to authorize the charge to the card in the amount in accordance with the card issuer agreement and click submit. Okay, so the application has now been submitted. So it's just that simple. And it's actually, of course, not that simple because there's just a lot of information that is required with our registration forms. But the technology that we're using, does allow at least the technical part of it to be quite a lot more straightforward than before. Now, the other thing that's going to be really helpful, I think, is that in the past, and actually currently until we deploy DEX, what happens to registrants that renew or that are coming in new, they fill out the form, they send it to us, and then it's kind of a big, deep, dark hole of not knowing. And in this case, you will be able to log into DEX and see that there is that we received the registration application and whatever status we can provide, we will provide, so that most of we have a response team, and about half the calls that we get to our response team are questions relating to whether or not the application was received. So that's going to be a thing of the past because you'll be able to actually see right here on the screen, that you've submitted your application and that it's awaiting the analyst review in this particular case. All right, so I think we should just go back to the PowerPoint presentation at this point. Okay, all right. Yeah, so just to kind of give you, where we're headed. We plan to release advisory opinion application very soon, in the next few weeks. We're looking at a later date in December or in early January, so you can plan to do that. And I want to talk a little bit about the advisory opinion application because I think that's a really important piece of this modernization and sort of illustrates how much and how far we've come. The advisory opinions have always been provided to us by mail. They've been in the form of a letter that gets mailed to us, and at some point it makes its way from wherever you've sent it from to our office. And it can take a week, it can take even longer before anybody knows that it's a thing. And these platforms allow you to put this information into a form, into a standard form, and the minute that you push submit, we've got it. And the clock starts ticking in terms of us processing that request. And advisory opinions are clarifications of our rules. They're very important to industry for us to process quickly. And so it's, I am very happy to hear that, that's happening quite soon because letter requests in general are very difficult to process in some ways because they have different types of information in them. They're very difficult to categorize easily without a lot of manual intervention. So that's going to be great for industry, and I think it's going to be great for DDTC, and I think we're going to be able to answer those kinds of questions more quickly and get people the advice they need so that they can do more business, getting adjudicated licenses, but more importantly, being able to do their business of exporting these commodities. So we're going to start doing industry testing for our licensing applications very early in January, and that is going to that is also going to be interesting and I think very helpful to industry from the standpoint that we will be able to you'll be able to use a variety of different certifications, not just the ACES cert, but you'll be able to authenticate very simply. You'll be able to file applications both in batch and on an interactive, sort of TurboTax style like you just saw in the registration application, and you'll be able to stop an application, restart it, have it be there, have multiple people review it before you submit it, and all the things that you would come to expect from a modern system. So we also plan to release the registration and licensing applications in the spring once we've done thorough industry testing. And we're also modifying our commodity jurisdiction application, and that will be relaunched in DEX when it comes up for renewal also in the spring. So all of our communication with industry is going to be revamped in 2019. So there will be no more IBM forms, there will not be any more wire transfers. It's all going to go through DEX, and it'll allow you to actually see the status of your applications right through this interface. So we are, in addition to getting these applications ready for you, we're migrating all of the data from our existing system. We're doing some cleanup, and we're going to make sure that for your first registration renewal that you clean up anything that we haven't been able to clean up. So that's kind of the plan for the deployment of DEX. So with that, I guess we can start with questions. And I think we can start with the chat questions first, right?
Karen, let's go ahead and start with the incoming calls, and while we're still queuing up for the chat questions.
All right.
Thank you, speakers. Participants on the phone, if you'd like to ask a question at this time, please press star 1 and record your name. Please make sure your phone is unmuted and record your first and last name clearly with the prompt. To withdraw your request, please press star 2. Again, if you have a question at this time, please press star 1 and record your name.
Her screen, she needs to.
One moment, speakers, as we await questions. At this time, I'm showing no questions in the queue.
Great, Jazz, we're sending over the questions via chat feature.
Okay. So we have a question. Okay, so we have a question. Will saved and or submitted registration information survive if the laptop on which the work was done has its history wiped and cookies cleared?
Yeah, so if you have pressed save, it saves to the server, and you'll be able to get the application back again when you relog in. So you could lose what is on the current page that has not yet been saved, but that's the least of what you would lose.
Second question from Catherine. Will we be able to keep a copy of our registration submission showing all information submitted?
And the answer to that is yes. You will be able to print out, save it as a PDF. You'll be able to get whatever information that you need to put it onto your computer and be able to, store it away or send it to whomever you need to.
Another chat question from Sandra. How does the system know that I represent my company when I sign up for an account? Who is able to access and view the registration page, index anyone from my company?
That's a great question, and I should have probably spoken more directly to this. The way that we plan to migrate the data from the existing system is to take what we're calling the corporate administrator and their credentials that we have in the existing system and transfer that capability, the super user capability, to the corporate admin, which would be the person that would then be able to go into DEX and identify who should have what permissions within DEX. So who should be able to see the registration application, for example. So that's how we plan to do it. And then for new registrants, the question on the form that is the point of contact will be by default the corporate administrator, and will have that authority to go in and see the registrations, and will also have the ability to identify the permissions or select the permissions for each additional user for the company.
A related question from Tricia: is there a separate login for the CEO or senior official to sign the renewal?
Yes, there is a separate permission-based role for the CEO or whoever needs to do the signature piece of this.
Will there continue to be an email notice to renew an invoice amount, or do we have to log in when it is time to renew?
That is an excellent question. I would like to do away with doing notices, but I think at least for the first year, we're going to send some sort of notification, and then in subsequent years, I think we'll probably use email to identify and let you know that your registration is about to need to be renewed.
Will updates to registration completed through DEX, such as a change of address, replace the need to notify DDTC within 5 days as described in 122.4 of the ITAR?
Yes, you will be able to make those kinds of minor changes right in DEX by going in immediately and, when you know of it, and fulfilling that requirement of that 5-day notification.
Can you talk about digital signatures and how those will work with DEX?
Yes, a little bit. I can talk about digital signatures. There's really two things. In registration, the signature, keying in the name is considered to be the digital signature of the registration application. We also have, on the licensing side, the digital certificates, which actually have a digital signature sort of associated with it because you're actually using the digital certificate. So we consider the keying in of the name by the CEO his or her signature. Likewise, on a licensing application, the fact that you've logged in with the digital certificate and signed the application with the keystroking in your name would be considered a digital signature.
Will industry be able to test the super user capability prior to launch?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. We'll need to have users test that capability to make sure that it's working properly before we launch. And that will also happen, in the spring.
A question from Anne. Will attorneys and consultants be able to assist with registration on DEX via the corporate administrator role?
Not via the corporate administrator role. The corporate administrator role is, okay. So this is sort of two questions. The corporate administrator role is generally someone from the inside the company, I would think, from a best practices perspective. You would have someone in the company doing this, and then they would identify who else would have access to the system to help with different types of, data entry and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't think that there's anything stopping an entity allowing a contractor to do this. I'm just not sure that it would be a wise thing to do from a governance standpoint. So I don't think it's been, I think you probably could do it, but I think we have always been thinking of it as being someone from within the company.
And a follow-up to that, perhaps not to the corporate administrator role, but could a third-party consultant or lawyer be granted access by an internal corporate administrator?
Yes, and that's how we had envisioned that it would work.
A question from Ryan: will I be able to see all past registrations submitted using DEX going forward? For example, when I register in year 2, can I see the registration submitted in the previous year?
Yes, you will be able to see the previous registration. Once we go live, it'll be ongoing. We're not going to bring back an old registration from a previous year when we go live in DEX, but everything post-DEX deployment will be available for you to review.
Question from Douglas: will there be a button to make amendments to information between renewals?
There are certain fields that can be updated between renewals, and then there's also certain fields that can be updated as an amendment. So there's sort of administrative things that you can change within it, and then there's also more substantive pieces that you can do between your renewals. Now, the one thing that is not going to be in DEX in the first release are mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. So they are going to continue to be manually processed, and they will be deployed in DEX later in the year. So I didn't mention that before, but that's an important distinction. So material changes are going to be done manually, and that will be the last thing that we'll be deploying in DEX. And so minor changes will be able to be made in DEX during the initial launch.
Question from Randy: will we still require an electronic ACES digital certification?
We're going to continue for licensing to have digital certificates, and we're not going to just have ACES digital certificates. We're going to allow multiple types of digital certificates that are all contained in an approved list through the General Services Administration. And what we did there is, we talked a lot, we worked with the Defense Trade Advisory Group, DTAG, to try and determine what the best way of handling authentications will be. And what we decided is in the initial launch that we didn't want to make large changes to the authentication we wanted to continue to allow the same type of digital certs that we have in our existing system. This is a question that, will continue to evolve, what the best way of doing authentication for licenses is. And so, it's not to say that we won't decide to do something different. One of the things that's important to me is that we allow anything that can go over the federated bridge to be able to be used in DEX. And so if you have a digital cert of any type that can be used under the federated bridge, that you don't have to get something special for, to interact with Department of State, with the Directorate. So that's kind of where I am right now. And then in addition, with CATS 1, 2, and 3 moving to commerce, I think what we're left with is things that are many of the larger companies. And so the idea is that many of these larger companies are the very ones that actually want to have, digital certs. And so, I think we need to readdress the authentication piece again once the firearms are moved over to commerce, and see what remains and what is the best way of authenticating to our system to ensure that your information stays private and that we're able to secure all the data that comes in.
Next few questions are related to licensing. One question from May. When you mention testing for the licensing application, do you mean the DS7788 form, or will we be testing this form via the batch interface?
Okay, so that's a good question. What we are deploying in DEX is the legacy forms. So that's the forms 5, 6, 61, 62, 73, 74, 85. So that's what's going to be deployed. The 7787, we have made major renovations to that since we first went out for 60-day public comment on it. We plan to go out for another 60-day and 30-day public comment on that form, and that form will also require rule changes, which need to go together over to OMB to be as a package. And all of that work will be done subsequent to moving the firearms over to commerce. So I don't know the exact timeline of when we're going to go back out with that form. But I will say that we have finished our work on it, and we are ready when we have the rules that need to accompany it, so that we can make sure that those things are in tandem. And we plan to go back out for a complete PRA OMB review. So nobody's missed anything. And you'll have an opportunity to provide your comments in the normal government process for doing that with forms.
And will the licensing testing include batch?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I suspect that we'll do the batch testing before we do the interactive application testing. We want to get that, fully flushed out with our partners. Since so many of the applications come in through batch, we'll definitely be starting that testing sooner. That'll be one of the next things that we endeavor to test. I suspect right after the first of the year.
Question from Randy: will there be a future webinar on license applications in DEX?
Yes, we plan to do a future webinar on licensing, and that will likely be late January or February. And you'll be able to see what that application looks like. We'll probably start with the DSP-5, and then we'll probably do one session with the DSP-5 and 6 maybe, and then we'll do a subsequent section webinar that focuses in on the temporary import and temporary export forms.
Question from Mona: can third parties sign up for license integration using Okta?
Yes, third parties are users in this system, and they would be going through Okta, but they would have to be authorized by the corporate administrator of the company and sort of invited to participate as a user for that company. So they can't just sort of come in and ask to be put on somebody's account. The corporate administrator would take the role of identifying the people that would be associated with the account, and then that third party would go in and do their thing with, they would get an email, and they would click on the email to get enrolled in DEX under that company.
Okay, I think we have addressed all the chat questions at this time. Operator, are there any questions from callers on the line?
Thank you. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name. It looks like we did have a question. It comes from Tatia. You may begin.
Hello. So this is Katia. We just renewed our registration, and just wanted to see what is it that we need to do to prepare for the next registration round? Like, do we have to sign up with the new DEX? And also, I have a question about the signature for the senior officer. Do they also need to register through DEX in order to provide a signature for registration?
Yeah, so you've just done your renewal, right? And so, or your new application. So a year from now, and even actually before that, you are going to get notified that we have created an account for you in DEX. And so you wouldn't have to wait for the next time you renew to set yourself up in DEX. You could, as soon as you get that email, you could go through this enrollment process and get yourself set up in DEX so that you could see very clearly that when your expiration date is. Now, what the CEO would need to do is the corporate administrator. So we know who the corporate administrator, who the super user is for your account is now. So we're going to transfer them, migrate all that data, and turn them into a user. We're going to do that in DEX. You're going to get an email, and in that email you're going to click on it, and you're going to enroll yourself in DEX. And that's the corporate administrator. So then the corporate administrator identifies the person who's the certifying official and makes them the certifying official and adds their email address to DEX. And then that corporate administrator, that certifying official gets an email inviting them to be a user in DEX. And so they go in, click on the email, click on the link, and enroll themselves into DEX. And of course, maybe somebody's over their shoulder helping them do that, or not, depending on who they are and what experience they have, doing these types of activities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, and I also have one more question about the payment. For ACH, you mentioned that is going to be designed only for higher amount payments. So if we're sending a payment for $2,700, we will not be able to do ACH, or can we continue using ACH?
No, you can continue using ACH. I was kind of just using it as a bad example that, you wouldn't be able to put millions of dollars on a credit card.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. You can use whatever way you want to use. Yep.
Great, thank you.
There are no other questions in the queue.
Any more questions on the chat? All right, so do we have,
There are additional questions. So one from Matthew: could other parties use the site to look up if the company they are working with has a valid registration?
If they're a user, if a person is a user under a corporate administrator of an account, they can look things up. But only users that are authorized by a corporate administrator would have access to DEX. So the general public does not have access to DEX.
And one user could not see another company.
That's right. One user cannot see another company's information unless they've been authorized by the corporate administrator.
A question from Odyssey: is there a question in the registration application as to whether your company has written ITAR policies and procedures in place?
Yes, there is, and that is, I don't remember which block it is. I think it's block 10, and that's on the currently approved OMB registration form. Now, I will make mention that we are in the process of renewing that application. And so it is between the 60 and 30-day comment period. There have been some minimal changes made to that application, and it will be likely going out for the 30-day comment right around the first of the year. So if you're interested in making sure there's no problems or concerns that you have with the registration form, and we will likely be making some changes based on the 60-day comments that we got already. So that's just to, make a note of that if you're interested in looking at that form more.
Question from Anne. Can third parties participate in the registration and licensing sex testing?
Yes, third parties can participate in testing. What needs to happen for testing in DEX is that we want to ensure that people agree that are testing that they're not going to put any sensitive information, any PII, any technical data, anything. And so there is a little bit of a process of agreeing to those things that we require from our testers. But anybody from the public can test the applications. But they have to agree not to put any sensitive information into our system because, during that testing period, we don't have, we have a very secure system, but we haven't gone through all of the compliance issues at that stage to get an authorization to operate. So we have to insist that people don't put anything sensitive into the test system.
A question from Douglas. Could you please clarify, the registration contains very personal information for directors, officers, for example, social security numbers, addresses, birth date. Will all users within a company be able to see that personal information, or just the one or two persons who have been given special access to the registration information?
Again, that's up to the corporate administrator. So the corporate administrator could give all those rights to allow people to see things, or the corporate, because the corporate administrator could, for example, identify everybody as a corporate administrator. And then you would not have the safeguards against that data. But you can also, the corporate administrator can have very strict controls on who gets to see what. And I think the important thing to remember is that it's up to the company and it's up to that corporate administrator to secure your own data within the system.
Any other questions at this time?
There are no other questions from the phone.
Okay, great. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation in today's webinar. Special thanks to Karen Wrege, the presenter from the State Department. Ask that you please visit the Census website for future outreach events. And this completes today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you for your participation. You may disconnect this time. Speakers, please stand by for the post-conference.